My daughter drew me a picture yesterday. Two stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The kind of innocent art that normal fathers hang on refrigerators in normal homes. I keep it folded in my breast pocket, right over my heart, because in 3 hours I'll be dropping from orbit to kill something the size of a city block. My name is Akira Yamamoto. I'm 34 years old and I hunt kaiju for a living. 23 years ago, they rose from places where maps end and nightmares begin. From ocean trenches that plunge deeper than human understanding, from volcanic fissures that birth demons in shells of living stone, from storm clouds pregnant with malice older than civilization. The kaiju turned our world into a hunting ground where humanity became the prey. I've been hunting them for 9 years. In that time, I've watched this war transform from desperate survival into something far more personal, far more terrifying. The monsters are learning, evolving, and whether we admit it or not, so are we. The Japanese Defense Force classifies hunters from E to S rank. I'm one of 4 active S-class hunters in Japan, which means I'm authorized for solo engagements against threats that could level prefectures. It also means I have a 97% chance of dying in the field before my 40th birthday. People ask how I've survived when better hunters haven't. The answer lives in 7 rules, each one carved from the graves of friends who learned them too late. These aren't tactical guidelines or safety protocols. They're prayers written in blood, whispered in the dark by people who've seen what waits beyond the light. But before I tell you about the rules, I need to tell you about May. She was 7 when I first realized the hunting was changing me. I'd come home from a 3-day deployment in Sendai, missing half my left arm and carrying shrapnel in my chest that would set off metal detectors for the rest of my life. The medical team had done their best, but some wounds mark you in ways that go deeper than flesh. May sat cross-legged on our apartment floor, her school uniform wrinkled from a day of being 7, surrounded by drawings of flowers and butterflies and all the beautiful things that existed in her world. When she looked up at me, her expression carried something I'd never seen before. Not fear exactly, but recognition that the father who'd left 3 days ago wasn't quite the same man who'd come home. "Daddy, you're different." She was right. Something had broken in Sendai, something more fundamental than bone or flesh. I'd learned my first rule the hard way, written in the blood of my partner and the screams of civilians I'd failed to save. The knowledge had changed me at a cellular level, rewired my understanding of what it meant to be human in a world where being human wasn't enough. "Bad men got hurt, but the good guys won," I said, kneeling beside her drawings. The words felt inadequate, a child's explanation for an adult horror that had no good answers. "But why do you have to be the one who fights them?" I could have told her about duty, about the mathematical reality that only 4 people in Japan could face S-class threats and come home alive. I could have explained the neural interfaces, the bio-locked weapons, the years of training that had rewired my nervous system for violence. Instead, I picked up one of her crayons and drew a crude stick figure with a sword. "See this little guy? He's scared, but he stands between the scary things and everyone he loves. Sometimes being scared is okay, as long as you don't let it stop you from protecting what matters." May studied my drawing with the intense concentration that children bring to everything important. "Is he going to win?" "I don't know," I said, because lying to her felt worse than the truth. "But he's going to try his best." She added her own drawing to mine, a sun shining down on the stick figure, yellow rays like fingers of hope reaching through the darkness. "There, now he won't be alone." That was the moment I understood what I was really fighting for. Not humanity in abstract terms, not the continuation of civilization as a concept, but one specific girl who believed her father could stand against the dark and somehow find his way home. The first rule saved my life in Sendai, and it's saved me 63 times since then. Trust your weapon like your heartbeat, because the moment you doubt it, you die. My rifle, Kaminari, weighs 38 kilograms, and fires concentrated plasma at temperatures exceeding the surface of the sun. But those are just numbers. What matters is that Kaminari knows me. My breathing patterns, my trigger pull, the way my hands shake after I've killed something that used to be impossible. The weapon is bio-locked to my DNA, calibrated to my nervous system through a neural interface that required 18 hours of surgery to install. The metal was forged from the crystallized bone marrow of the first S-class kaiju I killed. Engineers call it resonant matter, material that retains the electromagnetic signature of its source. When I fire Kaminari, I'm not just launching superheated plasma. I'm releasing the concentrated rage of a creature that died hating everything human. I learned this rule's importance during my second deployment as a freshly minted A-class hunter. My partner then was Lieutenant Kenji Matsuda, a man with 43 confirmed kills, and hands steady enough to thread a needle during an earthquake. He carried a standard-issue particle rifle, reliable but impersonal, the kind of weapon designed by committee and built for efficiency rather than connection. We were tracking something the briefing files called Bone Crusher through the ruins of a shopping district. The creature stood 15 meters tall, its hide thick as battleship armor, moving through the rubble like a walking disaster that had forgotten what it came to destroy. Kenji's rifle jammed during the initial engagement, the plasma containment field collapsing just as the creature noticed our position and decided we were worth its attention. "Take mine," I said, offering him Kaminari. He waved me off, reaching instead for a fallen hunter's weapon lying in the debris like an abandoned promise. "I don't need the fancy gear, rookie. One gun's the same as another." He was wrong. When Kenji squeezed the trigger on an unfamiliar weapon, the targeting felt off, the weight distribution foreign in hands that had never learned its moods. His shot went wide by 3 meters, missing the creature's skull and instead enraging it beyond measure. Bone Crusher's retaliatory strike leveled 4 city blocks and killed 17 civilians who'd been hiding in what they thought was safety. That night, I knelt beside Kenji's body in a medical tent that smelled like antiseptic and failure. Half his face was gone, carved away by flying concrete when the building collapsed. But his eyes were still intact, still staring at nothing with an expression of surprise that would never change. "Should have taken your gun," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of distant artillery. "Should have trusted you instead of trusting myself." He died holding my hand, his grip weakening with each labored breath until his fingers went slack, and I was alone with the first rule burning itself into my mind. Trust your weapon like your heartbeat. Trust it more than pride, more than familiarity, more than the voice in your head that says all weapons are the same. They're not. Kaminari knows my soul, and in return, I know its capabilities, its limits, its moods. When I pull the trigger, we're not man and machine working together. We're a single organism dedicated to the art of making monsters die. May was 8 when the cancer started. The doctors called it acute lymphoblastic leukemia, but I knew what it really was. Radiation exposure from my gear, particles embedded in my clothing and skin after too many hunts, too many fights with creatures that existed at the bleeding edge of physics. My war against the kaiju had infected the person I loved most, turned my own body into a weapon pointed at my daughter's future. "Daddy, do you ever get scared?" she asked during her first round of chemotherapy. The treatment had stolen her beautiful black hair, leaving her scalp pale as moonlight. But her eyes still burned with curiosity about everything. "Every day," I said, stroking her head where hair used to be. But fear is just information. It tells you when something's dangerous, so you can be smart about how you fight it. What if you can't fight it? I thought about that question while machines pumped poison into my daughter's veins, fighting cancer with chemicals that were almost as deadly as the disease itself. What do you tell a child when the monster isn't something you can shoot, when courage and weapons and all the rules in the world won't save the person you love most? "Sometimes fighting means different things," I said finally. Sometimes it means being brave enough to smile when you hurt. Sometimes it means holding someone's hand so they don't feel alone. She squeezed my fingers with strength that seemed impossible for someone so small, so fragile, so utterly breakable. I'm holding your hand too, Daddy, so you don't feel alone when you go fight the monsters. That was when I understood the second rule, not just as tactical knowledge but as lived truth carved into the architecture of my soul. Know the enemy's heartbeat before your own, because patterns are the difference between predator and prey. Every kaiju species has tells, micro-movements that precede their killing blows. These patterns aren't obvious. They're buried in the rhythm of breathing, the flutter of sensory organs, the subtle weight shifts that happen milliseconds before death comes calling. Acid spitters flex their throat sacs in specific sequences before discharge. Bone breakers shift weight to their dominant limb exactly 2 seconds before a charge. Flame hearts dilate their core vents 1.3 seconds before thermal release, drawing oxygen to feed the inferno building in their chest cavity. But the rule goes deeper than technical knowledge. It's about understanding that everything alive follows patterns, even 9-year-old girls with leukemia who try to be brave for their fathers. May's pattern was morning vomiting followed by afternoon rallies where she'd insist on drawing pictures or playing games. Her breathing changed 2 days before the bad episodes, becoming shallow and rapid as her body prepared for another assault from treatment that was supposed to save her. I learned to read those patterns the way I read kaiju behavior, watching for signs that meant I needed to be present, needed to hold her hand through another night of pain that no child should endure. The knowledge didn't make me a better father, just a more informed witness to suffering I couldn't prevent. It was during one of those hospital vigils that I met Takeshi Sato. He arrived carrying authorization papers and a smile that could power cities, my new partner assigned after Kenji's death. Where I was methodical and analytical, calculating angles and trajectories with mathematical precision, Takeshi was pure instinct, reading monster intentions through some sixth sense that defied explanation. "So this is the famous Yamamoto," he said, entering May's hospital room with the casual confidence that marked natural-born hunters. "I've read your file. Impressive kill count for someone so young." May looked up from her drawing tablet, studying Takeshi with the intense focus that children bring to new adults. Her latest round of chemotherapy had left her weak, but her mind remained sharp as a blade. "Are you going to fight monsters with my daddy?" "That's the plan," Takeshi said, settling into the chair beside her bed with easy grace. "Mind if I ask what you're drawing?" "It's a picture of Daddy's gun. See? It has a lightning inside it, and when he shoots it, the lightning goes into the monsters and makes them go away." Takeshi examined her artwork with the seriousness that such revelations deserved. The drawing showed Kaminari in remarkable detail for a child's work, down to the resonant chamber where crystallized kaiju bone channeled plasma into coherent death. "That's quite a weapon. Does it ever miss?" "Never," May said with absolute certainty. "Daddy doesn't miss because he's the best monster fighter in the whole world." I saw something shift in Takeshi's expression then, the moment he understood what this assignment really meant. He wasn't just partnering with another hunter. He was stepping into the life of a man who carried more than weapons into battle, who fought not just for humanity in abstract terms, but for one specific girl who believed her father was invincible. "Then I guess I'd better make sure I don't slow him down," Takeshi said, extending his hand to May for a formal handshake. "Partners?" "Partners," she agreed, her small hand disappearing into his larger one. That partnership lasted 3 years and 47 joint operations. Takeshi never slowed me down, never failed to watch my back, never let me forget that we were fighting for more than statistics and casualty reports. We developed a combat synergy that felt supernatural, each of us knowing where the other would be without need for communication. In 3 years of hunting together, we never lost a civilian under our protection, never failed to neutralize a target, never came home with wounds that wouldn't heal. But patterns aren't just about the enemy. They're about recognizing when everything you think you know is changing, when the rules themselves are evolving into something new and terrible. The first sign came from the water. Fishing boats returning to port with crews babbling about sounds from the deep, harmonies that shouldn't exist sung by voices that had never been human. The sonar readings were worse, showing massive movement in trenches that plunged deeper than our equipment could measure, patterns of displacement suggesting something the size of a mountain range was stirring in the abyssal depths. Then the attacks began changing. Not random anymore, not driven by hunger or territorial instinct. The Kaiju started targeting specific infrastructure with surgical precision: communication towers, power distribution centers, transportation hubs. They moved like soldiers following orders, coordinating their assaults with tactical precision that spoke of shared intelligence. "They're learning," Takeshi said during a briefing that showed attack patterns from the last 6 months. Red dots on the map, each one marking a strike that had crippled some vital aspect of human civilization. "Look at the progression. They start with random destruction, then focus on military targets. Now they're going after civilian infrastructure. That's not evolution. That's strategy." The briefing officer, a colonel whose hair had gone white from too many impossible situations, nodded grimly. "Intelligence suggests coordinated leadership, something directing the attacks, prioritizing targets based on strategic value rather than proximity or availability." I studied the map, seeing patterns that made my blood freeze. The attacks weren't just coordinated, they were surgical, designed to isolate Japan from global support networks while systematically dismantling our ability to mount effective resistance. This wasn't random predation. This was an invasion conducted by intelligences that understood human society's pressure points and vulnerabilities. "Any theories on what's running the show?" I asked. "Nothing confirmed, but deep ocean monitoring has detected something large moving through the Pacific Trench system. Larger than anything we've encountered before. Preliminary readings suggest it's been there for months, possibly coordinating the surface attacks from a command position." That night, I sat beside May's hospital bed and watched her sleep. She was 11 now, thin from treatments that seemed to hurt more than help, but still determined to smile when she saw me. The cancer was winning despite everything medical science could throw at it, spreading through her small body with aggressive hunger that mirrored the Kaiju's systematic approach to destroying human civilization. When she woke, her eyes focused on me with effort that shouldn't have been necessary for an 11-year-old girl. "Daddy, I had the dream again. The one about the big one, under the water." May had been having strange dreams for months. Visions of creatures that hadn't been discovered yet. Battles that hadn't been fought. The doctor said it was a side effect of the medication, but I wasn't so sure. Her descriptions were too accurate, too detailed for simple fever dreams. "What did you see this time?" "It's not like the others. It's smart, Daddy. Really smart. And it's been watching us, learning how we fight, waiting for the right time to come up from the deep." "What does it want?" "I don't know. But in the dream, you're standing on water that's turned to glass, and it's talking to you. Not fighting. Talking." 3 days later, the ocean began screaming. The sound carried across thousands of kilometers of open water, a subsonic hymn that drove whales to beach themselves on foreign shores and made sonar operators quit their jobs after nervous breakdowns. When Leviathan finally rose from the depths off the Izu Peninsula, it brought the ocean with it. The creature was serpentine beyond comprehension, its body stretching from horizon to horizon in coils that defied perspective and challenged the human brain's ability to process scale. Each scale was the size of a city block, diamond hard and reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each tooth was a crystalline spear longer than skyscrapers, sharp enough to cut through space itself. But the most terrifying aspect was its song. the subsonic frequencies that turned human bones to tuning forks and human minds to static. The initial response team lasted 47 seconds against the creature's psychic assault. 3 A-class hunters reduced to catatonic shells as their consciousness shattered under alien harmonies. The support fleet fared worse, entire crews jumping overboard to swim toward the monster's maw, with expressions of religious ecstasy painted across their faces. I arrived via orbital drop, falling from the edge of space in a re-entry capsule designed to punch through Kaiju defensive fields. The descent took 4 minutes of watching Leviathan systematically destroy everything humanity could throw at it. Naval destroyers became toys in its coils, their hulls crumpling like aluminum cans. Fighter jets fell from the sky as pilots succumbed to the creature's song. The capsule struck ocean at terminal velocity, plunging beneath waves before emergency systems brought me to the surface in superheated steam. I floated in water that tasted of copper and despair, watching Leviathan's impossible bulk move through depths like a living mountain range exploring its domain. The creature's head breached the surface 300 meters away, rising until it blotted out the sun and cast shadows that stretched to the horizon. Its eyes were pools of bioluminescent fire, older than civilization, deeper than nightmares, filled with intelligence that had been contemplating the cosmos since before humans learned to fear the dark. When it looked at me, I felt the weight of eons pressing against my consciousness, the accumulated hunger of something that had been waiting in deep places since the planet was young. This was where I learned the third rule: floating in hostile water while something larger than a city decided whether I was worth eating. Distance is your prayer, movement is your salvation, but sometimes you have to get close enough to touch the thing that wants to kill you. My targeting system couldn't lock onto something so vast that measuring it became meaningless. Kaminari's scope showed only scales and flesh extending beyond range parameters, an endless expanse of living tissue that disappeared into mathematical infinity. Fighting Leviathan was like trying to kill the ocean itself. But every creature, no matter how massive, has a heart that pumps whatever passes for blood through its system. I switched to Seeker mode, programming Kaminari to track bioelectric signatures rather than visual targets. Somewhere in that impossible bulk was an organ that sustained the creature's life, a heart that beat with rhythms older than human history. Find the heart, destroy the heart, end the nightmare. The scanner painted a target 60 meters below the surface, protected by layers of muscle and bone thick enough to stop artillery shells. A conventional shot would never penetrate that deep. But Kaminari had one modification that engineers had warned me never to use, a setting they called Sunbreaker, that would transform the weapon into a directed fusion bomb. The charge cycle would take 90 seconds floating in hostile water while something larger than a city decided my fate. Leviathan's song intensified as it became aware of my presence, subsonic frequencies turning my thoughts to mud and my vision to fractured kaleidoscope patterns. I bit through my tongue to maintain focus, using pain as anchor to reality while the creature's psychic assault tried to dissolve my consciousness. The taste of blood helped block out alien harmonies, creating a shield against influences that had driven stronger minds to madness. Around me, water began to glow with bioluminescent patterns as Leviathan's offspring rose from depths to investigate the disturbance. At 60 seconds into the charge cycle, the first spawn reached me. Only the size of a great white shark, but armored with crystalline scales sharp enough to slice through submarine hulls. I drew my sidearm and put 3 shots through its skull before it could close distance. The corpse sank, trailing phosphorescent blood, but a dozen more spawn were already ascending. At 30 seconds, they reached me in coordinated assault that spoke of hive mind intelligence. I emptied my sidearm into the swarm, each shot buying precious seconds of charging time. But for every spawn I destroyed, 2 more took its place. At 10 seconds, I ran out of ammunition and switched to the plasma knife attached to my wrist guard. The blade carved through chitin and bone with surgical precision, painting water red with alien blood that glowed with its own light. But the spawn kept coming, endless waves drawn by scent of violence. At 0 seconds, I triggered the sunbreaker and became the center of a miniature star. The detonation turned a cubic kilometer of ocean into superheated plasma, vaporizing every spawn within blast radius and carving a crater in Leviathan's hide deep enough to park an aircraft carrier. For a moment that lasted forever, I existed at the center of a fusion reaction, while reality rearranged itself around impossible energies. When the light faded and steam cleared, Leviathan floated motionless on the surface, its great heart finally still. The ocean around us had turned to glass, a perfect mirror reflecting the sky where moments before had been chaos and blood. I drifted in that glass sea for hours before rescue teams found me, my body irradiated by energies that would take months to purge from my cellular structure. The medics called it a miracle. I knew better. Miracles were for people who believed the universe had mercy to spare. That night, floating between consciousness and oblivion in a hospital bed, I learned the 4th rule from my daughter's voice, speaking through machines that monitored my recovery. Every mission has an exit strategy, even the ones you don't survive, but sometimes the mission changes while you're fighting it. My neural beacon broadcast my location, vital signs, weapon status, and tactical analysis to Oversight Command every 3 seconds. When I fell, they'd know exactly where to send body bags and what killed me. This information helped them brief the next hunter who'd face the same creature. The beacon also served as a dead man's switch, connected to Kaminari's core. If my vital signs flatlined, the weapon would enter auto-destruct mode, building to a plasma overload that would vaporize everything within 2 kilometers. Sometimes taking the monster with you was the only victory available. But the rule went deeper than mission parameters and casualty reports. It was about understanding that some fights were bigger than individual survival, that some victories required sacrifices that couldn't be calculated in advance. Against Leviathan, my exit strategy had been to hurt it badly enough that other hunters could finish the job. Instead, I'd somehow killed something that shouldn't have been killable, turned part of the ocean into glass, and come home with knowledge that changed everything I thought I knew about the war we were fighting. The creature hadn't just been large, it had been intelligent, coordinating the attacks that had been puzzling our strategists for months. When it died, the pattern of Kaiju assaults shifted immediately, becoming random again, losing the surgical precision that had made them so effective. We'd killed the command structure, but that raised a question more terrifying than any we'd faced before. If Leviathan had been the commander who had been giving it orders? The answer came 3 weeks later, when every seismic monitor in Japan registered something impossible. Mount Fuji was bleeding. It started as a slow seepage of crimson that turned the snow on Mount Fuji the color of rust and made pilgrims speak in hushed tones about omens and apocalypse. Seismic monitors detected movement deep within the volcanic system, something massive stirring in chambers that hadn't been active for centuries, disturbing magma flows with movements that suggested intelligence rather than geological activity. When Infernus erupted from the mountainside, it brought the fire of the Earth's core with it. The creature was a walking volcano, its body composed of living magma held together by obsidian bone and sheer malevolence. Each step melted the ground beneath its feet, turning ancient stone into bubbling lakes of lava. Each breath turned air to scorching ash that killed everything it touched. Where it passed, the forest became a wasteland of glass and char. Every living thing reduced to carbon shadows burned into the rocks. But unlike previous kaiju, Infernus moved with deliberate purpose. It targeted power lines that melted like spiderwebs, highways that buckled and flowed like tar rivers, communication towers that became pillars of fire visible from orbit. This wasn't hunger or instinct. This was systematic destruction guided by intelligence that understood exactly what it was targeting. I was deployed alone, Takeshi engaged with a secondary threat that had emerged near Osaka at precisely the same time Infernus began its assault. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidence. The Kaiju were learning to divide our forces, ensuring that each monster would face minimal resistance. The transport helicopter couldn't get within 10 kilometers before its systems began failing from heat damage. I made my final approach on foot, crossing terrain that had been transformed into a hellscape of bubbling rock and poisonous gas. My suit's cooling systems ran at maximum output, but temperature readings climbed past operational limits, while alarms screamed warnings that should have been unnecessary. Through thermal haze that turned distant objects into wavering mirages, I watched Infernus methodically destroy everything in its path. The creature wasn't just feeding or establishing territory. It was eliminating human infrastructure with the precision of a surgeon removing tumors. My first shot struck Infernus in the shoulder, a concentrated plasma burst that should have carved through any armor. The bolt simply vanished into the creature's molten body, absorbed without effect like throwing snowballs into a furnace. Fighting something made of living fire with thermal weapons was an exercise in futility. I switched to kinetic rounds. Solid projectiles accelerated to hypersonic velocities. The shots struck home with impacts that shattered stone and rang like thunder, but Infernus's molten flesh simply flowed around the wounds, healing faster than I could inflict damage. The creature turned toward me with movements like flowing lava, each step creating tremors that registered on seismographs 3 prefectures away. Its eyes burned with stellar heat, ancient beyond measure, and intelligent enough to recognize me as a threat worth addressing. When it roared, the sound came from every direction at once, the very air combusting around its vocal cords. I realized then that conventional weapons were useless against something that existed at temperatures beyond human technology's reach. But every creature, no matter how alien, followed certain universal laws. Infernus was composed of molten rock, which meant it required constant thermal input to maintain structural integrity. The solution was elegant. I couldn't kill the fire, but I could starve it of fuel. I retreated to higher ground, drawing the creature away from its thermal vents toward snow-covered peaks where ambient temperature would work against its physiology. Infernus followed with mechanical persistence, leaving a trail of melted stone that glowed like a scar across the mountainside. At 8,000 meters above sea level, where air was thin enough to make breathing difficult, ambient temperature dropped below freezing, despite the creature's radiant heat. Infernus's movements began to slow, its molten flesh cooling from bright orange to dull red as the mountain's cold began to sap its thermal reserves. I switched Kaminari to cryoburst mode, an experimental setting that fired supercooled plasma at temperatures approaching absolute zero. The first shot struck Infernus' center mass, and for the first time, the creature flinched. Where cryoplasma made contact, molten flesh hardened into brittle obsidian that cracked under thermal stress. The second shot shattered that obsidian like glass, sending fragments of the creature's own body spinning through air like shrapnel. Infernus's roar became a shriek of pain and rage, echoing across mountain peaks like the dying song of the earth itself. The creature's internal heat began bleeding away through cracks in its cooling armor, steam rising from wounds like the breath of a dying god. My third shot punched through its hardened chest plate and found the molten heart beneath. The cryoplasma froze the organ solid in microseconds, turning the creature's life force into a chunk of volcanic glass. Infernus collapsed like a falling mountain, its body cooling from incandescent fury to cold stone in minutes that felt like geological ages. The impact crater glowed with residual heat, a perfect circle of glass that would mark the site for centuries. But victory felt hollow as I stood in the aftermath, watching steam rise from the creature's corpse. Another monster dead, another threat eliminated, another day humanity survived by the narrowest of margins. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that we were fighting the wrong war, killing symptoms while the disease spread through the world's bloodstream. When I returned home, I found May in the hospital again. Her latest round of treatment had failed catastrophically. the cancer spreading to her brain and spine with aggressive hunger that mirrored the Kaiju's systematic approach to destroying everything human. The doctors say weeks, maybe a month, Yuki told me in the corridor, her voice hollow with exhaustion and grief held barely in check. They're talking about comfort care now. I sat beside May's bed and watched my daughter sleep, her breathing assisted by machines that beeped with artificial heartbeats. She looked so small against the white sheets, so fragile, like a flower trying to bloom in nuclear winter. When she woke, her eyes focused on me with effort that shouldn't have been necessary. "Daddy, I had the dream again, the one about the thing that wants to talk to you. What does it want to say?" "It wants to make a deal," she whispered, her voice barely audible over life support systems. "It says the war doesn't have to end with everyone dying, but someone has to choose." "Choose what?" "I don't know. It's too big for me to understand. But in the dream, you're standing on glass and fire, and you have to pick which way the story ends." That night, I learned the fifth rule from my dying daughter's unconscious mind, reaching across impossible distances to touch something that existed beyond human comprehension. Pain is information, fear is wisdom, death is graduation. But sometimes love means choosing evolution over preservation. The Kaiju weren't just predators hunting for food. They were evolution's final exam, testing our species' readiness for something larger than planetary existence. Every wound taught us about their anatomy. Every scar marked a lesson learned in the only classroom that mattered. Fear wasn't weakness. It was intelligence recognizing something that could transform you or destroy you, depending on how you responded. But the rule went deeper than tactical knowledge. It was about understanding that love sometimes required letting go of everything you wanted to protect, trusting that transformation served purposes larger than individual comfort. 3 days later, every early warning system in Japan screamed simultaneously as something rose from the deepest trenches of the Pacific Ocean. Not swimming or climbing, but ascending with mechanical precision, displacing water in volumes that created tsunamis across 3 time zones. When Nightmare Prime breached the surface, it brought with it a revelation that redefined everything we thought we knew about the Kaiju War. The creature was humanoid in basic structure, but wrong in every detail, standing 80 meters tall with proportions that hurt to look at directly. Its skin was black as space between stars, and its eyes burned with light that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. But the most terrifying aspect was how it moved, not like a beast following instinct, but like a diplomat arriving for negotiations. It waded through Tokyo Bay with purposeful strides, ignoring military installations and population centers to focus on a single target, the Defense Force headquarters where Kaiju policy was made and hunter deployments were coordinated. When it reached the building, Nightmare Prime stopped walking and began to speak. The voice came from everywhere at once, transmitted through frequencies that bypassed human hearing and spoke directly to the neural implants that connected all active hunters to the tactical network. The language was mathematical, pure information encoded in patterns that human brains weren't designed to process, but somehow understood anyway. "We request parley," the voice said, each word carrying harmonics that made reality ripple around the edges. "Send the one called Yamamoto. He has been selected for discourse." I was airborne within minutes, flying toward a creature that had somehow learned my name, that had traveled across light years of space to arrange a conversation I wasn't sure I wanted to have. Through the tactical feed, I watched Nightmare Prime wait with infinite patience, its massive form perfectly motionless except for the slow rhythm of breathing. "This is Yamamoto," I broadcast on all frequencies as my dropship settled onto a nearby rooftop. "What do you want to discuss?" Nightmare Prime turned toward me with movements like flowing shadow, and when our eyes met, I felt something probe the edges of my consciousness. Not violent like Leviathan's psychic assault, but surgical, precise. extracting information about human culture and psychology with terrifying efficiency. "You have fought our advanced scouts with admirable skill," the creature said, its voice hijacking every communication system within range. "Your species shows promise, but your understanding of this conflict is incomplete." "Then explain it. Tell me why you're here, why you're killing us, what you want from our world." "We are not invaders," Nightmare Prime replied, the statement carrying such casual certainty that it rewrote my understanding of the last 9 years. "We are gardeners, cultivating a crop that has grown wild without proper tending. Your species has reached the threshold where guidance becomes necessary." "Guidance toward what?" "Evolution or extinction. The choice has always belonged to humanity, but the time for choosing grows short. Your planet enters a phase where biological intelligence must transcend its limitations or be consumed by them." Around us, the city held its breath as an alien intelligence explained the true nature of the war we'd been fighting. The Kaiju weren't conquerors seeking to claim Earth for themselves. They were teachers, using violence as curriculum to force human development along specific evolutionary paths. "The creatures you call Kaiju are examination protocols," Nightmare Prime continued, its massive form radiating patience that spoke of geological timescales. "Each encounter tests different aspects of human potential: courage, adaptation, cooperation, sacrifice. Those who survive the testing become eligible for advancement. Advancement to what? To joining the greater community of intelligence that spans galaxies, to taking your place among species that have successfully navigated the transition from planetary to stellar civilization. Your hunter classification system mimics our own evaluation matrix, though you lack context to understand its true purpose." I felt the weight of May's drawings in my breast pocket, her unconscious mind somehow reaching across impossible distances to witness conversations with entities that existed beyond human comprehension. My daughter had been dreaming about this moment for years, her cancer-ravaged brain receiving transmissions from creatures that operated on frequencies beyond mortal understanding. "What about the people who fail your tests?" "They provide genetic material for the next generation of candidates. Nothing is wasted in the Garden of Evolution," Akira Yamamoto. "Every death serves a purpose. Every sacrifice contributes to the advancement of your species." The casual mention of sacrifice as evolutionary tool made my blood freeze. The Kaiju hadn't been killing humans randomly. They'd been selectively eliminating those who failed to demonstrate the qualities required for galactic citizenship, while preserving and breeding those who showed promise. "My daughter is dying. She's 11 years old, and she's dying of cancer. What purpose does that serve in your grand evolutionary scheme?" For the first time since our conversation began, Nightmare Prime showed something that might have been emotion. Its massive head tilted slightly, studying me with eyes that burned with stellar fire. "The child called May demonstrates abilities that transcend normal human limitations. Her consciousness operates partially outside linear time, accessing information patterns that exist beyond causality. The cellular degradation you call cancer is a side effect of neural pathways being rewritten for non-biological cognition." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. May's cancer wasn't random cellular rebellion. It was her brain being transformed into something that could process alien mathematics, could receive transmissions from entities that existed outside normal space-time. Her drawings, her dreams, her unconscious knowledge of Kaiju encounters she'd never witnessed. It was all part of a metamorphosis that was killing her human body while creating something else. Can you save her? We can complete her transformation, preserve her consciousness in a form that transcends biological limitations. But the choice must be made freely, by both father and daughter, with full understanding of what such preservation entails. Which is, she would become like us, existing primarily as information patterns that can manifest physical form when necessary. Her human life would end, but her existence would continue indefinitely, spanning galaxies and eons as part of the collective intelligence that guides species through evolutionary transitions. I thought about May's last drawing, the three figures standing on broken glass. One tall and dark, one small and bright, one massive and wrong. The choice she'd said I would have to make, standing between glass and fire while deciding which way the story ended. And if I refuse, then she dies as humans die, her potential unrealized, her unique capabilities lost forever. The testing of your species continues until sufficient candidates emerge, or until the deadline for advancement passes. What happens if we miss the deadline? Your star enters a phase of instability that will render this planet uninhabitable within 2 centuries. Species that achieve transcendence can survive stellar evolution. Those that remain purely biological cannot. The sun was dying. Our sun, the one that had warmed humanity's cradle for millennia, was approaching a transformation that would boil away the oceans and turn Earth into a cinder floating in space. The Kaiju weren't just testing us for membership in a galactic community. They were offering the only escape route from planetary annihilation. How long do I have to decide? The window for optimal intervention closes when the child's biological functions cease. Given current degradation rates, you have perhaps 72 hours to choose between transcendence and termination. Nightmare Prime began to sink back beneath the waves with the same mechanical precision it had used to rise, its massive form displacing water in patterns that created perfectly geometric waves across Tokyo Bay. We will await your decision, Akira Yamamoto. Choose wisely, for the fate of your species hinges on the courage of those who love enough to let go. I stood on the rooftop as the creature disappeared beneath dark water, my daughter's drawing pressed against my chest, the weight of 2 worlds resting on shoulders that felt too small to bear such responsibility. That night, I sat beside May's hospital bed and watched her sleep while machines breathed for her and monitors tracked the slow rebellion of cells that were being rewritten for purposes beyond human understanding. She looked so small against the white sheets, so fragile, like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon that was killing her, even as it prepared her for flight. When she woke, her eyes focused on me with effort that shouldn't have been necessary for an 11-year-old girl. "You talked to the big one, didn't you?" "Yes. It says it can save you, but not in a way that keeps you human." "I know," she said, with matter-of-fact acceptance that children use when discussing impossibilities. "I've been dreaming about what comes next. It's beautiful and terrible, and bigger than anything we can imagine." "Are you afraid?" "Sometimes, but mostly I'm excited. It's like being offered the chance to become a star, Daddy. How could anyone be afraid of burning that bright?" I held her small hand in mine, feeling how cold her fingers had become, how thin her pulse was against my thumb. The cancer was winning, consuming her human body even as it prepared her consciousness for something that transcended biological existence. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to let me go," she said, squeezing my fingers with strength that seemed impossible for someone so close to death. "I want you to let me become what I'm supposed to become, even if it means you can't hold my hand anymore." "And what about me? What happens to your old man when you become a star?" "You keep fighting monsters," she said with a smile that lit up her face in ways that made my chest ache. "But now you'll know why the fights matter. You'll know that every person you save might be someone's chance to transcend, might be humanity's next step towards something beautiful." That night I learned the 6th rule from my daughter's courage in the face of transformation that would carry her beyond the reach of human love. The dead never leave you. They become part of your weapon, part of your aim, part of the fury that keeps you moving when everything else fails. But May wouldn't be dead, not in any way that mattered. She would become something eternal, something that could exist across galaxies and witness the birth of new universes. The rule meant more than sentiment or memory. It was practical acknowledgement that love could survive any transformation if it was strong enough to let go when letting go served something larger than holding on. I called Nightmare Prime the next morning, using frequencies that my neural implant could access, but my consciousness couldn't fully comprehend. The creature's response came immediately, as if it had been waiting for my decision with infinite patience. We are prepared to begin the transformation. Bring the child to Tokyo Bay at sunset. The transition must occur in water, where electromagnetic fields can be properly modulated. That evening, I carried May to the shore where glass met water. Her body so light in my arms that she felt like she was already becoming something else. The doctors had protested, threatened legal action, demanded explanations I couldn't provide. But Yuki understood, had seen the same dreams that plagued our daughter's sleep, had reached the same impossible conclusion about what love required when human options ran out. Nightmare Prime rose from the depths as the sun touched the horizon, its massive form creating waves that spread across the bay in perfect geometric patterns. When it reached the shallows, the creature extended one appendage toward the shore, its skin shifting to reveal neural interfaces that pulsed with alien light. "Are you ready, little star?" I whispered to May as I waded into water that felt warm despite the evening chill. "I've been ready since I drew that first picture," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I love you, Daddy. Remember that when I become something too big to hug." I placed her gently in the water, where it met Nightmare Prime's extended appendage, watching as alien technology interfaced with her failing nervous system. The transformation began immediately, her consciousness uploading into patterns of information that could exist independently of biological substrate. For a moment that lasted forever, I could see her as she truly was. Not just my 11-year-old daughter, but a being of pure thought and possibility. Intelligence unbound by the limitations of flesh and blood. She burned with light that made the setting sun seem dim, her awareness expanding to encompass galaxies and dimensions that human perception couldn't access. "The transformation is complete," Nightmare Prime announced as May's body dissolved into component atoms that scattered like stardust across the bay. The child called May now exists as eternal information, her consciousness preserved and expanded beyond biological constraints. I stood in water that tasted of salt and transcendence, watching my daughter become something that would outlive stars and witness the birth of new universes. The grief that filled me was cosmic in scale, but so was the pride. My little girl had become exactly what she was meant to be, a bridge between humanity and infinity. That night, alone in our empty apartment, I learned the seventh and final rule from the space where my daughter's laughter used to live. When the enemy evolves, you evolve with them or you die, but sometimes evolution means becoming something that can love across impossible distances. The Kaiju attacks continued, but with a difference I could feel in my bones. Each encounter became a teaching moment, an opportunity for humanity to demonstrate readiness for transformation. Some hunters began to understand what the creatures truly represented. Others continued fighting them as simple predators, unable or unwilling to accept that the war was really an examination. I became something between both perspectives, hunting the kaiju that threatened human populations, while also serving as a liaison between species, helping to identify candidates who showed potential for transcendence. The work was harder than simple killing, requiring judgment calls about who was ready for evolution and who needed more time to develop. 6 months after May's transformation, I received my first communication from her new form of existence. The message came through my neural implant while I was tracking a creature called Stormwing through clouds above Hokkaido, encoded in frequencies that bypassed human hearing and spoke directly to the soul. "Hello, Daddy," her voice said, carrying harmonics that made my consciousness resonate like a struck bell. "I'm okay. Better than okay. I can see everything now. All the beautiful patterns that connect life across the universe. And I can see you, still standing guard between the darkness and the light. Are you happy?" Happiness is too small a word for what I am now, she replied, her voice carrying laughter that sounded like music from distant stars. But I remember being happy, and I remember loving you, and those memories make the infinity bearable. The creature I was hunting suddenly changed course, its movements becoming less aggressive, more purposeful. Through my scope, I could see intelligence in its eyes that hadn't been there before, recognition that spoke of recent transformation. The one you're following used to be human, May's voice explained. A hunter from the Australian Defence Force who chose transcendence during a mission 3 days ago. She's still learning how to manage her new form, but she's not dangerous anymore. She's becoming what we all become, eventually. I lowered Kaminari and watched the former human navigate storm clouds with grace that defied physics, her consciousness learning to manipulate matter and energy through pure intention. The creature that had once been Sarah Chase, Australia's youngest S-class hunter, had chosen evolution over death when faced with a kaiju that offered the same choice Nightmare Prime had given me. How many others have made the transition? 17 so far, from 6 different countries. The testing is accelerating as more humans demonstrate readiness for advancement. Soon, there will be enough transcended consciousness to begin the next phase, which is teaching your species how to survive stellar evolution, how to maintain civilization when your sun begins its final transformation. The knowledge is too complex for biological brains to process, but transcended minds can serve as repositories and teachers for those who remain human. I flew home through skies that felt different, more alive somehow, populated by consciousnesses that existed partially outside normal space-time. Some were former humans learning to navigate transcendence. Others were alien intelligences that had undergone similar transformations millions of years ago, now serving as guides for species just beginning their own evolutionary journey. The war between humanity and kaiju was ending, replaced by something more complex and hopeful. We were learning to see the creatures not as invaders, but as teachers, not as enemies, but as evolutionary catalysts. The hunters who survived the transition would become humanity's ambassadors to a galactic community older than our solar system. But some would choose to remain human, to preserve the biological heritage that had carried our species from prehistoric caves to the edge of transcendence. They would be the guardians of humanity's childhood, protecting those who weren't ready for evolution while the transformed blazed trails through infinity. I was one of the guardians, standing watch between two worlds, hunting monsters that were really examinations, protecting a species that was really a chrysalis. The rules that had kept me alive were evolving too, becoming something larger than survival tactics, growing into principles for managing existence that spanned both mortality and transcendence. 3 years later, Takeshi made his choice. We were hunting a creature designated as Void Walker through the ruins of Kyoto when it offered him the same option Nightmare Prime had given me. The monster stopped its rampage mid-strike, turned to face my partner with eyes that burned with stellar intelligence, and spoke in harmonics that bypassed human language entirely. I watched through my scope as Takeshi lowered his weapon, understanding flooding his face as he finally grasped what the war had always been about. The choice he made was instant, decisive, beautiful in its absolute commitment to something larger than individual survival. The transformation was faster this time, the aliens having perfected their techniques through practice. Takeshi's consciousness uploaded into patterns of pure information, while his body dissolved into component atoms that scattered like cherry blossoms on a spring wind. For a moment that lasted forever, I saw him as he truly was, not just my partner and friend, but a being of infinite possibility, preparing to explore galaxies I would never see. "Take care of yourself, old man," his voice whispered through my neural implant as his new form of existence learned to navigate dimensions beyond human perception. The real hunt is just beginning. I stood alone in the ruins of a temple older than human memory, watching my partner become something that would outlive the death of stars. The grief was familiar now, tempered by understanding that love could survive any transformation if it was strong enough to transcend the boundaries of individual existence. That night, I went home to an apartment that felt too large for one person, filled with memories of laughter that echoed across impossible distances. May visited me in dreams, her consciousness reaching across galaxies to remind me that love was the only force in the universe strong enough to bridge the gap between mortality and transcendence. "You're doing good work, Daddy," she whispered, as I stood on my balcony looking up at stars that might once have been human. "Every person you save is another chance for humanity to grow into something beautiful. Every choice you make brings our species closer to the moment when we can all be together again, in forms that can love without fear of loss." "I miss you," I said to the night sky, my words carrying across distances that light would take millennia to cross. "I know," came her reply, warm as sunlight on my face. "But missing is just love that hasn't learned how to span infinity yet. Keep practicing, and someday you'll understand." My name is Akira Yamamoto. I'm 37 years old, and I hunt kaiju for a living. But now I know what the hunt really means, what the killing really accomplishes, what the dying really serves. I'm standing guard at the border between nightmare and dawn, between human and post-human, between the species we've always been and the species we're becoming. The monsters are still out there, still testing us, still offering choices between evolution and extinction. And I'm still following the rules, still trusting my weapon, still moving through the dance of violence and transcendence that separates the living from the graduated. Because in a world where monsters are really teachers and death is really commencement, someone has to stand watch while humanity learns to spread its wings. The rules keep evolving, just as we keep evolving, just as the universe keeps demanding that we become more than we ever imagined possible. Trust your weapon like your heartbeat. Know the enemy's patterns before your own. Distance is your prayer. Movement is your salvation. Every mission has an exit strategy. Pain is information. Fear is wisdom. Death is graduation. The dead never leave you. When the enemy evolves, you evolve with them or you die. 7 commandments carved from the bones of the fallen, written in blood and proven in fire, whispered in the dark by people who've learned that love is the only force strong enough to survive transformation on a cosmic scale. I follow them, one hunt at a time, one choice at a time, one step at a time toward a future where the only monsters left are the ones we choose not to transcend. Because that's what hunters do. We stand between the darkness and the light, between what we are and what we might become, between the safety of the known and the terrible beauty of evolution. My daughter is a star now, burning bright across galaxies I'll never see, with eyes that were only designed for one small world. My partner has become something that can manipulate matter with pure thought, existing as information patterns that span dimensions beyond human comprehension. They visit me in dreams and whisper encouragement when the hunting gets too hard, reminding me that love can survive any transformation if it's strong enough to let go when letting go serves something larger than holding on. The next emergency alert is already forming in tomorrow's darkness, carrying news of transformations that will make everything I've witnessed seem like gentle practice. When it sounds, I'll check my weapon, review the rules, and walk into hell with the confidence of someone who's learned that hell is just another word for the place where angels learn to fly. The hunt never ends. It just grows into something larger, something more wonderful, something that spans the space between heartbeats and the distance between stars. And I'll keep hunting, keep choosing, keep standing watch until the day comes when I too must decide between the human I've always been and the star I might become. Until then, I remain Akira Yamamoto, S-Class Kaiju Hunter, guardian of humanity's transformation, keeper of rules that evolve with the universe itself. Standing between worlds, hunting teachers that wear the faces of monsters, Protecting a species, learning to transcend the very concept of protection. The rules have kept me alive through everything. Now they're teaching me how to live with love that spans infinity, grief that encompasses galaxies, and hope that burns brighter than the death of suns. Some days that's enough. Some days it has to be.